In 2025, this has been a long time coming, but you know those high-end GPUs, RTX 5090, you know, that guy has pushed up above $2,000. That is a ridiculous price for a damn gaming graphics card. We all know it's not really just used for gaming at the end of the day. You see the progression of the RTX 3080. Back in 2020, when that came out, it was $700. And then in 2022, with the 4080, it jumped up to $1,200. And in 2025, they actually brought the price back down to $1,000 instead of $1,200. Thank God. Now it's only $300 more than the 3080. So these higher end graphics cards have found a way to inch themselves up in price and, you know, make the performance a bit better, give a bit more better specs, but not significantly so. You know, like, is it worth that much more money? The progression is slowing down significantly, which is why throughout time and everything, you just look towards the budget gaming market. The budget gaming market should be good. And we've seen some massively great budget graphics cards over the years, like the GTX 1060, 6GB. This card was $300, and even today, this is still getting on minimum system recommended specs, even though this came out in 2016. We see even the RX 580, again, a great graphics card, 8GB of VRAM and everything, $230. It's crazy to think that back then you could get graphics cards for $230. Yeah, inflation and everything, but damn, 230 bucks is nice. And you said 1050 Ti. Back in the day, 50 class graphics cards, yeah, it wasn't giving you a ton, but it was still only freaking $140. Something that just sounds unheard of today. Even in 2019 with the GTX 1660 and 1660 Super, you know, $230 for a pretty decent graphics card. Even today, it kind of holds up. There has been some really good budget graphics cards throughout the years, and that includes something like the RTX 3060, which blows my mind how good this graphics card has held up. It is aging like fine wine. The 3060 came out in 2021. It is like 4.5 years old at this point, still number 2 selling on Newegg. Yeah, they're still being produced and everything, but it says something when a graphics card this old is still being sold regularly. Hop over to Amazon bestsellers. Also, the 3060 is the most sold graphics card if you don't want to include the freaking GPU support stick. And to me, the continued success of the 3060 is a sign. And it's honestly because the new stuff we've seen hasn't really improved in terms of the value, in terms of the performance, struggles to even use the new technology. And then certain aspects of the new cards have been actually downgraded compared to older budget options, which is just weird. You'd think things would get better over time, and honestly, maybe not. I finally did get Nvidia's new most budget graphics card option, the RTX 5050.
5500, you'll have to get DDR4. This is DDR5.
Despite it coming out pretty recently in July, it does not show up on any of these bestseller lists. So here's Newegg. There's no RTX 5050 on here whatsoever. It says a lot that people aren't really looking to even get this graphics card. Kind of blows my mind. But I do have two good things to say about this guy. If you were to go out there and compare it right now against its predecessor, the RTX 3050, it's 35% faster according to Hardware Unboxed at 1080p. So that's pretty good. I don't know how you can argue with that. It beats the older generation counterpart by quite a bit. Even though the 3050 came out in 2021, so it's actually more like 4 to 4.5 years old as well. And the 3050 was already shit at the time it came out. The only other good thing I can say about it is it is $250. Let's compare it to the RTX 3060 though. Like, why is the 3060 so popular in 2025? Now, typically at 1080p, so the most common resolution, the 5050 does actually win by about 10 to 20%. It depends on the game. This isn't including any of that ray tracing fancy shit that these budget cards probably won't be using that much. But you can see in quite a few games that the 5050 does actually take a lead on the 3060. So why the hell are people stupid enough to buy the old card? It's not a ton faster, but it is faster. Well, what ends up happening is when you come across a game like Horizon Forbidden West, for example, you know, the 5050 is only averaging 31 FPS, and it has frame spikes all over the place. So if you want to play this game, it's going to be stuttery as hell. Whereas the 3060 is actually running relatively like fine. Like, it looks a little weird. The frame time graph isn't perfect. I wish it was going faster than it is, but I'd rather be playing on the 3060 than the 5050. In Alan Wake 2, the 5050 still can't even get 60 FPS at medium settings. This isn't high settings or ultra settings or any of that bullshit. It can't even get 60 FPS at 1080p medium settings. And if you look over to the 3060, in terms of the performance, is it really that far behind the 5050? I mean, it's a little bit slower, but like, I don't know if I'd really care that much. And the lead starts to draw thin with the 5050 in Black Ops 6. So like, what the heck is going on here? You would think with the 5050 being newer and being around-ish the same price point, that you would get a pretty significant improvement over 4.5 years. Well, in some of these games, it is actually because the 5050 is lacking of iron. It is actually anemic. It is so malnourished, it is crazy. And I'm not even talking about the 5050 itself, like the graphics card version I tore it down. Every single cost cutting measure they could take, they took it. Just think it's funny. So here is literally one heat pipe. It's ridiculous. The chip, if you tear it down, is absolutely minuscule. And for whatever reason on this one, the PCB, only like half of it's being used, and then they moved the power connector over to the other side, which is just weird. It's like every weird thing they could have possibly done. Why is there a thermal putty back here? Why are they putting that onto plastic? I'm so confused. They did it, and I guess maybe it saved them a few bucks or something. But at least it's not like AMD's competition, where the 9060 XT only has 3 display outs on it. It's a weird compromise, but not the end of the world, I guess. But let's forget about the graphics card itself right now. The malnourishment is because of the 8 gigabytes of VRAM, the memory that is on the GPU, compared to its old cousin. The 3060 has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And this is very significant, especially in 2025 on the budget gaming side. And not only that, but the 5050 only has a 128-bit bus. I know a lot of nerd shit kind of numbers and stuff, but just know that the 3060 has a 192-bit bus. And this nuance makes the 5050's memory pretty significantly slower. It is only 320 gigabytes per second, whereas the 3060 is 360 gigabytes per second. But forget the speed. The capacity is the big thing. The 5050 only has 8 gigabytes, the 3060 has 12 gigabytes. Games even at 1080p in 2025 want more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Like, this is a pretty regular occurrence in tons of different titles. And on top of that, if you want to turn up some settings at 1080p, like Last of Us Part 1, for example, it runs pretty fine on the 5050 on high setting. But if you want to go up to ultra settings, the 3060 is hanging in there just fine. Whereas the 5050, you start to see some micro stutters every now and then. Now the VRAM doesn't just affect turning up settings in the games, but also if you want to go up in resolution. Now back in 2021 when the 3060 came out, it was marketed as a 1080p graphics card. In 2025, you'd maybe be thinking that a budget graphics card would maybe be marketed at 1440p if they want to provide better value. And the fact that 1440p monitors and stuff are quite affordable nowadays. The problem is though, when you go up in resolution, the VRAM demands also increase. I don't know the game logistics of it. I'm not a freaking developer. Which means like Last of Us Part 1 at high settings at 1440p instead, the 5050 is stuttering like crazy. Reducing the resolution using upscaling doesn't really seem to help it for whatever reason. I don't know. I had so many issues even trying to get this graphics card to perform properly in games because of 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I don't know what's going on. I uninstalled, reinstalled drivers. I just had really weird performance in a lot of cases. But the 5050 was just acting so freaking weird. But you could also try to up the settings also at 1440p. I wouldn't even dare do that unless you love pain and suffering and maybe a little bit of torture. At the same time, the 3060 is completely chilling with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Not like the performance is incredible or anything, but yeah, at least it can run the damn game. And now at 1440p, the 5050 loses in Alan Wake 2. Even if you want to turn on some upscaling to help alleviate the VRAM concerns. In Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 at 1080p, the 5050 was 16% ahead, but at 1440p, it's only 8% ahead. So the 3060 is holding up a bit better at the higher resolution. Some textures are missing in Space Marine 2. You get all this buggeriness in Stalker 2, which is an Unreal Engine 5 game. It doesn't really like if you go over 8 gigabytes of VRAM. But if you want to total all these things up, the 5050 on average at 1080p is 8% faster, but at 1440p, it's actually slower, which is weird. Seeing this, it makes sense why people would still be interested and are buying the 3060 to this day, despite it being so old now. Something else I want to point out is those 1% lows. Even on average, you can see that there's so much more stuttering. The lower this number is, the worse the stutter performance is in the game. It's not going to feel very good to play. And I feel like I need to put up a trigger warning for this part of the video because I'm about to show you a war crime. Ray tracing also requires more VRAM. And throughout these tests, you'll see the VRAM consumption on the 3060 will probably go above 8 gigabytes in a lot of these titles. Remember, as we go through this, both of these graphics cards are RTX graphics cards. Ray tracing was literally baked into the name of these graphics cards. This is one of the things that they're meant to be able to do. You can see in some games that don't get as affected by the VRAM that architecturally, the newest Blackwell generation of graphics cards, the 5050 actually has a pretty decent advantage. But even in those games, like, it still is in no way even close to playable on the 5050, and it completely falls apart in games where the VRAM becomes a concern, like in Cyberpunk 2077. Do want to point out too that at least the 3060, you're not going to be playing on it, but at least it can boot up path tracing, which is everything in the game is ray traced in Indiana Jones, whereas the 5050 is just like, nah, I ain't even gonna bother with this shit. So it's crazy that in 2025, a brand new 5050 graphics card is actually a debatable pick. Like, you have to think about this over an RTX 3060 that came out 4.5 years ago. The 5050 is barely even built for games that came out today. You're gonna want to point out, it's gonna be like, Vex, you forgot about frame generation on the RTX 5050. That is ×4 frame gen. You don't want to use that on here, man. I hate to break the bad news, but frame generation also uses more VRAM. And guess what card doesn't have that much VRAM? It's basically pointless to have it on the 5050, but frame generation is only going to generate on top of the base frame rate. And it takes a bit of the performance to use the frame gen, especially if you need more VRAM. And then it's going to duplicate it from there or quadruple it from there. And then the 5050 is struggling quite a bit. Like, it doesn't feel good to play. There's so much latency. Now, on a side note, if we want to compare generation to generation, well, the 4060 is kind of the closest comparison to the 5050, and the 4060 actually beats the 5050 almost all the time. I can't really find many examples where it doesn't, but these cards both have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so a lot of the same problems still crop up. But the weirdest part today is that Nvidia actually offers another budget option, only $50 away from it, the RTX 5060. I do want to point out that the 5060, not by a ton, but this card came out in May, and it is now going for a little bit under $300. So like, it's definitely not like Nvidia is trying to get these things out the door or anything because nobody's buying them, right? Like, why would people not want to buy them? Because on paper, and actually in practice, the 5060 is quite a bit faster than the 5050. You know, we're comparing $250 to $300. That is a 20% difference. So it only needs to be 20% faster to get a decent deal. And at 1080p on average, it clocks in at 25% faster, at least according to my testing, which I don't think is that bad. Also, the VRAM on there is upgraded to GDDR7, which is a lot faster than the GDDR6 that is on the 5050. Although the problem with the 5060 is it didn't improve the memory capacity, or it doesn't improve the memory capacity at all compared to the 5050. So even though you're spending $50 more, all of the problems that the 5050 has, the 5060 also carries that same burden. Good luck playing at 1440p. You're gonna run into so many issues if you're playing even slightly the latest games. Good luck using ray tracing. I don't think you're ever gonna use ray tracing on the 5060. Good luck using frame generation. The main feature of this generation of graphics cards is frame generation, multi-frame gen, like ×3, ×4 modes. And the 5060 can't really use it without creating a ton of latency, a lot of artifacts, and just completely breaking in so many games with frame gen. So 8 gigabytes of memory is struggling right now in 2025, and it's just gonna struggle more and more. We see so many of the games coming out that are extremely demanding, and they actually want more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM continuing into the future. Now, developers could keep making games that only require 8 gigs of VRAM, but at a certain point, the industry needs to move forward. At the end of the day, though, you could just play Hollow Knight Silksong into infinity and get 700 FPS on that game, so you don't really need 8 gigabytes of VRAM. You could probably get away with that game with like 2 gigabytes of VRAM. It'd probably be fine. This is just my bias coming out because I've played a lot of Silksong recently, and damn, that is a good game. So you might think on this budget side of the market, Nvidia must have something then. Like they're not gonna make 2 back-to-back graphics cards around the same price points that fucking suck. Well, you could upgrade to the RTX 5060 Ti that costs $380. The problem with that is if you head over to the actual market and see how much these are starting to sell for, this is gonna blow your mind. This card came out in April of this year, so just a few months ago, and it's already dropping down to $320 when it's supposed to be $380. So many of the cards, most of the 5060 Ti 8 gigabytes are dropping below the MSRP, most of them, and it's pretty close to the launch. So these probably aren't selling that well. I wonder why. I think that really shows how much they're actually worth. Like the market is deciding where they are, and also Nvidia, like I don't know how much money they're making on these cards, but they can obviously get away with dropping the price down quite a bit and not really hurt too bad, I guess. What's funny though is I saw these prices and I was so surprised by it because I actually have the bigger brother of this graphics card, the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte. And I was like, I might as well buy one of these ones so I can compare them in the future because they're at such a dirt cheap price right now. I don't know if they'll get even crazier over time, but I went ahead and finally bought one, which still feels like I'm just throwing my money in the toilet. Now, from what I've seen, the 5060 Ti 8GB is actually quite a bit faster than the 5060 and the 5050. And at this cheaper price point, it kind of can justify it. It's not amazing, but you know, the performance is kind of there. The thing is, with the 8GB of VRAM, this 5060 Ti has all the damn same problems as the 5050 and the 5060. Except what I think is crazy is because it is faster, is actually working towards its own detriment at this point because it costs more, it's faster, but it still is limited by 8GB of VRAM. You're actually gonna want to turn up settings in these games. You're gonna want to go up in resolution. You might want to try ray tracing. And in all of these things, it's going to struggle to do them. Essentially, you're paying more and you're getting even more e-waste. It's wild how this card works out. The economics of it, the math ain't mathin', man. Having somebody get this card seems ridiculous. And all of this headache, all of this madness with these 8GB cards, like Nvidia clearly wants to push you to get the 16GB 5060 Ti because this card has double the VRAM capacity. I don't have both the 8GB and 16 to test against each other yet. However though, Nvidia has priced these cards. It's supposed to be $430 at MSRP, and even to this day, these came out in April. There's only 2 of them at MSRP, at least online, and most of these 16GB cards are still above MSRP for something that doesn't even cost that much to make. Like, I'm gonna show you something that just will blow your mind. So if you head over to videocards.com, there is a release now that GDDR7 memory. I'm pretty sure these are 3GB modules because it says gigabit, which there's 8 bits and a byte, so it's 3GB modules. It only costs $10 to get 3GB modules, which I think is nuts. And this is actually the DIY pricing, so if you just wanted to buy this memory yourself, then it would cost $10. But you know, when they build graphics cards, they buy this shit in bulk. I would even be surprised if it's not more than 20% discount. 3GB too. We're talking about 2GB chips that are on the 5060 Ti. It really doesn't cost that much more to actually make these 16GB graphics cards. Yes, the design of the PCBs are a little bit different because they have to put the memory on the back, but it doesn't cost them that much more to make them. And Nvidia is getting away with basically a highway robbery of charging so much more money for just that little bit more VRAM that makes the graphics card usable. Not to mention, a crazy part about these cards too is the actual connector on them. And when I tore down the 5050, you can see this for yourself, and even the 5060, but you can actually see these little traces that line up with the PCIe slot that plugs into your computer. Despite it having 16 lanes on it, only 8 of them are actually being used. The traces that go to the chip, only 8 of them are being used, which means that the bandwidth or the connection to your computer is only actually half of what would be in a lot of other graphics cards that are usually by 16 slots. And Nvidia made all of these 8GB graphics cards only 8x slots, which doesn't sound like a big deal because it is actually plenty of connection speed to your computer. Like PCIe Gen 5 with 8 lanes and everything is still extremely fast. Every PCIe generation, it actually doubles the bandwidth that connects to your computer. And even PCIe Gen 4 with times 8 slots is pretty nuts. The problem is though, if you have a Gen 3 computer, the bandwidth gets cut quite a bit. which is something that makes sense if you're buying a budget graphics card to also have a budget system powering it. And if you run over that 8 GB limit, well, actually that spillover causes a lot more problems. Hardware Unboxed did a video all about this with PCIe scaling with these 8 GB cards, and it wasn't great. Like, it is like such a sham. You get kicked while you're down. You already have an 8 GB card, and if it doesn't connect to your computer properly, then it's going to be even a worse position. They already cheap out on these cards in so many different ways. It just surprises me that they have to do the 8X thing as well. And seeing all this stuff on these cards, it's like, well, Nvidia still put them out there and wanted people to be able to buy them, right? Well, at the end of the day, at least to the DIY market, enthusiasts who actually buy specific graphics cards to put in our computers, those reviews on these 8 GB cards have been like silenced. So everything from the RTX 5050, 5060 and 5060 Ti 8 GB haven't really had any reviews. And you can see this on YouTube. A lot of the reviews out here, I just looked at the 5060 one, but you see it's the forbidden review from Gamers Nexus. No wonder Nvidia tried to stop us from talking about it. Nvidia didn't want you to see this. My review, actually, of the 5060, if you want to check that out. Linus Tech Tip says, I can't review GPUs that don't exist. Like, they don't even want to send people these graphics cards to show them to the public because they don't want general public to even know these graphics cards really exist. And that is my situation as well. Like, I have contact with Nvidia, and they didn't even try to reach out about these cards. They didn't try to send them out to anybody. So they want you to go up to like $430, $450 and get the 5060 Ti 16 GB to solve all of your VRAM concerns. Because the 5060 Ti 16 GB still is not a fully featured graphics card in a lot of different ways. It's very, very small for how much you're paying, to be honest. So you might be looking at the RTX 5070, which costs $550. That card is also anemic. It also doesn't have enough VRAM. It only has 12 GB, which for how fast it is, it's actually kind of sucks that it has so little VRAM. The difference with the 5070 though, is that that card is going to get a Super Series refresh probably by the beginning of next year. And that Super Series refresh is most likely going to up the VRAM capacity on the 5070 to be 18 GB instead of 12. So it'll have plenty of VRAM at that point in time. But the 60 class cards, at least up to this point in time, these are just rumors and leaks and everything. We don't really see that they're going to get any kind of super refresh to give them more VRAM and fix all the problems that they have. These cards are solely meant to upsell you to get these higher end graphics cards in their lineup. Which is one of the reasons why it annoys me so much when different reviewers out there are literally forced to recommend the higher end, more expensive graphics cards, because it's almost impossible to recommend to people these 8 GB ones, which at the end of the day, that's exactly what Nvidia wants you to do. Now I feel like it's about time for me to address it. I did also get the 9060 XT. This is AMD's most budget graphics card, I guess, nowadays. And at that $300 price point, it matches right up against the 5060. It pretty much destroys it in every single way. There's no point in getting the 5060. You can just see in so many of the tests that I ran, yeah, it's a lot faster. I would probably be picking the 9060 XT 8 GB in this case. However, though, there is two versions of this graphics card. There's also a 16 GB 9060 XT. And I actually have both versions of it. Both of these are the Asus version of it. The problem is though that I have the little rinky dinky 8 GB one, but I have the larger version, the prime version of the 9060 XT 16 GB. And that does lead to some differences, like the 8 GB one, because it's smaller, has less thermal mass, it runs a little bit hotter, and the clocks are actually a little bit lower compared to the prime card. There could be some slight differences in how they perform, but I don't think that's gonna matter when the margins we end up seeing in these games are way more significant than that little baby shit that we're talking about. Even at 1080p, Black Ops 6 is running 23% faster with the more VRAM on the graphics card. Again, this is the same GPU under the hood, the same die, same memory bus width. It just has more VRAM. Cyberpunk is 12% faster. And I want you to pay attention to those 1% lows. This tells you how much the game is stuttering the lower the number is, and that's really important for how the game actually feels. Doom: The Dark Ages runs so much better on the 16 GB card. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, 44% faster. That is ridiculous. Okay, and we're not even using a ton of VRAM technically. Hop over to like Stalker 2 and the 8 GB card kind of just breaks. You know, eventually it just runs into this scenario where it can't run properly anymore. And these issues between the VRAM capacities only get exemplified, like we talked about before, when you go up in resolution to 1440p. And it just struggles so much. Then you hop over to ray tracing that also uses more VRAM, and you pretty much just won't ray trace on the 8 gig card. It almost makes you wonder why it even has it. Maybe it's only for like Blender rendering or something, because the 16 gig one, like, it's not impressive in a lot of these ray tracing titles, but at least it can run the damn game and it's not absolutely crippled and falling to its knees. So I guess with all this taken into account, it shouldn't really surprise you that the 8GB 9060 XT is now going for discounted prices, you know, originally $300, and I've seen this $280 right now. Just a few weeks ago, this card everywhere was discounted to $270. It's like they're just trying to get rid of them, to be honest. And at that price point, it's not bad. Like $270, $280 is decent performance, and now sits, if it's at that price point, between the 5050 and the 5060. And if you want to take on the other perspective here, the 9060 XT 16GB, it only costs $27 to get 8GB of VRAM, and that's the DIY pricing. 9060 XT 16GB is now going above MSRP. You know, it's supposed to be $350 and it's going for $370, $380, $390 a lot of the time. It's because that VRAM is valuable. But the 8GB version of this card is now more closely competing with the 5050. The 9060 XT is clearly a better buy, despite it costing 8% more. In so many titles, it is regularly getting over 30% more performance. Like, it is a no-brainer. I would be spending a little bit more money, saving up a little bit more to get the AMD card every single time. But either way, that 8GB is still going to be a problem. It's still going to run into tons of issues, and you can't really get around it, it doesn't feel like. AMD is actually offering a new graphics card too. The RX 9060 doesn't have an XT on it or anything like that. But this card still only has 8GB of VRAM. This is another budget graphics card from AMD. They're taking a page out of the Nvidia playbook, where Nvidia doesn't really want these 8GB cards of theirs to be shown to the public. They want these cards to be sold mostly to just system integrators that will put them in pre-built PCs. People down the line are going to be like, oh, this kind of sucks. I need to upgrade my graphics card, I guess, or I need to buy a new pre-built PC. AMD's taken a note out of their playbook and making the 9060 non-XT. Now, you guys are probably screaming at me right now. It's like, hey, but Intel makes the Arc B580, which has 12GB of VRAM, which is pretty sick. And that card at launch and everything is only $250. The problem with the Arc B580 is it does have that VRAM. I recommend it more than these other cards, but the performance isn't that competitive at the end of the day. Like, you compare it to 9060 XT 8GB even, and it usually gets destroyed. And then you go into other things where the upscaling and stuff. So AMD has FSR 4, Nvidia has DLSS 4, Intel XeSS isn't holding up nearly as well as those other technologies are today. It's not bad, but it's not FSR 4. It's not DLSS 4, you know? Those technologies are pretty valuable, and Intel does have some more problems. You know, they're not as well fleshed out in the GPU market as AMD or Nvidia. Not that they're not doing good work. I think it's looking pretty good nowadays, but some hurdles to jump over. So this is kind of the state of the budget GPU market. It just doesn't seem like there's that many options that could fix the main problem of not having enough VRAM and the fact that games want more than 8GB nowadays. So in the past, you might think, well, if the new graphics cards that are budget aren't amazing, then you could just go to the used market, right? But the problem is the used market has just as many issues. Like, there isn't VRAM on the used market either. So when you look at it, if you're not spending more than like $400 on a graphics card in 2025, the entire budget market pretty much sucks, which is tough. And I think we are waking up to this, to be honest. We're seeing that a lot of these cards aren't selling that well. Like, below 8GB is not really up there on the list that much. People want more than 8GB of VRAM. One of the reasons why the 3060 is still so prevalent even to this day. And a wild point I found when researching this is that the 8GB models from Nvidia, the 5060 Ti and 5060, seems like they're going to be reducing their production. So the 5060 Ti will be reduced by 15%, while the 5060 will see a 30% cut in production. Could easily mean that they're just not selling that well. And here's the evidence here if you want to take a look at it. So Nvidia just wants you to upgrade to the higher end graphics cards. AMD also wants you to just upgrade to their higher end cards. We see the 9060 XT 16GB costing over the MSRP. That's what they want you to do, which I think is hilarious when the VRAM itself doesn't even cost that much more to make, like $27 for 8 gigabytes. Like, can we just add that to our cards and not have to worry about it? Maybe you could argue that there isn't enough supply of memory out there, and it does cost a good bit more to just get them on the graphics cards in 2025 because of AI and everything. AI needs a bunch of memory. But at the end of the day, they are trying to upsell you to get you to spend way more than you originally would on a budget graphics card. Not to mention too that these new cards, these new 8 gigabyte cards, claimed features is, multi-frame generation and ray tracing and everything. Both of those things that use more VRAM, and these cards can't even really do that stuff. So I just don't even know why you'd buy the latest generation of these things when it doesn't matter, at least on the Nvidia side. So let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. It has been a wild situation with budget gaming, and I'll probably be making a video relatively soon going over, breaking down each price point to make recommendations and everything. Also, I wanted to point out, as you'll probably have seen in a lot of the tests and everything, all the side-by-sides do have a little bit more information on the screen. You can see up top that there's actually the driver version. As long as the tests are updated to this point where I started doing this, the driver version is up there. Then there's also a date that is basically watermarked into the footage that I record of the day that I tested it. Hopefully that clears up any questions or anything, and if you want to compare things. So let me know what you think about that. Is that a clean solution? Hopefully it helps you know what's going on. That's been it for me though. Budget gaming sucks dick. At least that's what it feels like. And there's so many games coming out nowadays that they're so hard to run. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.
Also, W soundtrack from Silk Song in this video.